Hello, dear viewers. Before we begin tonight's story, I want to thank you for your continued support. If you enjoy this tale, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Now let's dim the lights and dive into tonight's chilling account. The matriarch said, "We don't speak of the twins." And now I know why. My grandmother's house always felt like it existed in its own pocket of reality. Nestled at the end of a winding dirt road in rural Vermont, surrounded by a dense forest of ancient maple trees, the Victorian mansion loomed 3 stories high with its weathered clapboard siding and steep gabled roof. I spent every summer there as a child, exploring its countless rooms, discovering hidden nooks, and playing in the sprawling gardens that my grandmother tended with religious devotion. But there was one room I was never allowed to enter, a locked bedroom at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway. Whenever I asked about it, my grandmother would purse her lips into a thin line and shake her head. "We don't speak of that," she would say, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Of course, being a curious child, this only made me more determined to uncover its secrets. I would press my ear against the heavy oak door during thunderstorms, convinced I could hear the faint sound of children's laughter coming from within. Once, I even tried to peek through the keyhole, but it had been plugged with something that blocked my view. When I asked my mother about it, her face paled. "We don't speak of the twins," she said sharply, and then she changed the subject. It was the only time I'd ever heard anyone mention twins in our family, and the memory of those words lingered in my mind for years to come. After college, I moved away to pursue my career, and visits to my grandmother's house became less frequent. Life has a way of rushing forward, pulling you along in its current until the mysteries of childhood fade into the background. But when my grandmother passed away last month at the age of 97, I found myself driving back down that familiar dirt road, watching the dense canopy of trees close in overhead. The funeral was a small affair. My grandmother had outlived most of her friends, and our family had always been small, just my mother, my Aunt Catherine, and a handful of distant relatives I barely recognized. My grandmother had been the matriarch, the pillar that held our fragmented family together, and without her, we were like satellites drifting apart. After the service, we gathered at the old house. It felt smaller somehow, diminished by my grandmother's absence. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I wandered through the rooms, trailing my fingers along the dusty surfaces of antique furniture and faded photographs. My mother found me in the library, staring at a portrait of my grandmother as a young woman. She looked so different than her face online, her eyes bright with youth and promise. "She left the house to you," my mother said quietly, holding out a thick envelope. "Along with this." I took the envelope from her hand. It was heavy, sealed with wax pressed with my grandmother's signet ring, an intricate design of intertwining roses. Inside was a key, old, brass, and ornate, along with a letter written in my grandmother's precise handwriting. "My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then I have passed from this world. The house is yours now, along with all its secrets. I have carried this burden for too long, and I cannot take it with me to my grave. The key enclosed will open the locked room on the 3rd floor. What you find there may disturb you, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about our family. The twins were born in the summer of 1952. Your grandfather and I were overjoyed. Twins had not been born in our family for generations, but joy soon turned to despair. There was something wrong with them from the beginning, something I cannot bring myself to describe even now. We did what we thought was best at the time. Perhaps it was wrong. Perhaps we should have sought help, but fear and shame can drive people to terrible decisions. I have preserved their room exactly as it was. Some might call it morbid, but I could never bring myself to erase them completely. They were still my children. Forgive me, Eliza, and be careful. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. With eternal love, Grandmother. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling more with each reading. The key felt unnaturally cold against my palm, as if it had been stored somewhere without sunlight for decades, which I supposed it had. My mother watched me from the doorway, her face a mask of concern. "What does it say?" she asked. I hesitated, then folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. "Nothing important," I lied. "Just some instructions about the house." That night, after everyone had left and the house settled into its familiar creaks and groans, I found myself standing at the foot of the staircase leading to the 3rd floor. The key weighed heavy in my pocket. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to respect my grandmother's lifetime of silence, but curiosity has always been my downfall. The 3rd floor hallway was dark, the only light coming from the moon through a small window at the end. The floorboards protested beneath my weight as I made my way down the corridor, past dusty paintings and forgotten furniture draped in white sheets. When I reached the locked door, I paused, my hand hovering over the knob. Was I ready for this? To uncover a family secret that had been buried for over 70 years? Before I could change my mind, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if it had been regularly oiled and maintained. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a room bathed in silver moonlight. It took my eyes a moment to adjust to the dimness. When they did, I saw that it was a nursery, preserved as if frozen in time. 2 identical cribs stood side by side against the far wall, their white paint yellowed with age. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a knitted blanket draped over its arm. Toys, wooden blocks, cloth dolls, tin soldiers were arranged neatly on shelves and tables, waiting for hands that would never play with them again. The air inside was stale but not unpleasant, carrying the faint scent of lavender and something else I couldn't quite identify. I stepped inside, half expecting to hear the laughter I'd imagined as a child. But the room was silent, holding its secrets close. On a dresser between the cribs stood a silver-framed photograph. I picked it up, wiping away a thin layer of dust with my thumb. The image showed my grandmother, much younger, holding 2 infants wrapped in identical blankets. She was smiling, but even in the faded photograph, I could see the strain around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. I set the photograph down and moved to the cribs. They were empty, save for small handmade quilts embroidered with names, Theodore and Theodora. I ran my fingers over the stitching, feeling a connection to these unknown relatives who shared my blood, but not my time. Something caught my eye, a journal resting on the knitstand beside the rocking chair. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. I carefully opened it to the first entry, dated June 15th, 1952. Today I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The labor was difficult, and at times I feared I would not survive it. But they are here now, and they are perfect. Theodore and Theodora, my beautiful children. The handwriting was my grandmother's, though shakier than the precise script I was familiar with. I turned the page. June 20th, 1952. Something is wrong with the twins. They cry constantly, but not like normal babies. It's more like screaming. The doctor says it's just colic, that it will pass. But there's something in their eyes when they look at me. Something knowing. It frightens me, though I'm ashamed to admit it. June 25th, 1952. They've stopped crying. Now they just stare, following me with their eyes as I move around the nursery. They don't sleep when they should. Instead, they lie awake in their cribs, watching. Always watching. The nurse quit today. Said she couldn't stand the way they looked at her. Harold thinks I'm being hysterical, but he hasn't been the one caring for them day and night. I flipped through more entries, each more disturbing than the last. My grandmother described how the twins developed at an alarming rate, sitting up and speaking their first words at just 3 months old. How they would whisper to each other in a language no one else could understand. How pets and small animals in the vicinity of the house began to disappear, only for the twins to be found playing with bones and fur. September 3rd, 1952. I caught Theodora standing over Theodore's crib last night, pressing a pillow over his face. When I screamed, she turned to look at me with such hatred in her eyes. She's only 3 months old. It's impossible. And yet. September 10th, 1952. Harold wants to take them to specialists in Boston. I agreed, but secretly I'm terrified of what the doctors might find. What if they take my babies away? Despite everything, they're still my children. I still love them. God help me, I do. September 10th, 1952. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with the twins. They said their development is advanced, but not concerning. Harold was relieved, but I know better. I've seen what they do when they think no one is watching. The way they communicate without speaking. The way small animals die in their presence. There's something inside them. Something not right. Not human. The entries continued, becoming more frantic, more paranoid. My grandmother described strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, voices whispering from empty rooms, shadows that moved against the light. And always, the twins at the center of it all, watching with their identical dark eyes. November 28th, 1952. Harold doesn't believe me. He says I'm suffering from some kind of postpartum psychosis. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm losing my mind. But I know what I saw last night. I know what I heard. I was awoken by singing a woman's voice, soft and sweet, coming from the nursery. When I went to investigate, I found the twins standing in their cribs, holding hands through the bars, their eyes closed. The singing was coming from somewhere above them, but there was no one else in the room. When they sensed my presence, they opened their eyes in unison. "Grandmother is coming," they said together. "She wants to play with us. My grandmother has been dead for 12 years. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. The next entry was dated nearly a month later. The handwriting almost unrecognizable, jagged and desperate, as if written in great haste. December 24th, 1952. Harold is dead. They killed him. I know they did, though the police are calling it an accident. He fell down the stairs, they say broke his neck. But I heard them giggling afterward. I heard them say, "One down. I can't stay here. I can't leave them alone. They're my children, my responsibility. God forgive me for what I'm about to do." The next entry was the last, dated Christmas Day, 1952. "It's done. May God have mercy on my soul." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. What had my grandmother done? What had happened to the twins? If they had died, why weren't they buried in the family plot beside my grandfather? I needed answers, and I knew where to look for them. The attic had always been off limits when I was a child, another forbidden space in a house full of secrets. The narrow staircase leading to it was hidden behind a panel in the hallway closet, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding wall. I found it easily enough some memories never fade, no matter how many years pass. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, the beam of my flashlight cutting through decades of dust and cobwebs. The attic was vast, running the entire length of the house, its ceiling following the steep pitch of the roof. Trunks and boxes were stacked in neat rows, each labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. Christmas decorations, 1960s Harold's clothes, family photographs, PRE 1950. I moved deeper into the space, scanning the labels until I found what I was looking for, a trunk marked simply T&T, 1952. The trunk was locked, but the key from my grandmother's letter fit perfectly. Inside, I found more journals, medical records, and a stack of photographs bound with twine. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and began to read. The medical records were from a private sanitarium in Switzerland, admission forms for 2 children, Theodore and Theodora Montgomery, dated January 3, 1953. The diagnosis listed for both was severe psychopathy with homicidal tendencies. There were treatment notes spanning years, documenting various therapies and medications, all apparently ineffective. The final entry, dated December 1, 1960, simply stated, "Patients deceased following unsuccessful experimental treatment." I set the records aside and untied the photographs. They showed the twins at various ages, as infants, as toddlers, and finally as children of about 8 or 9. In the earliest photos, they looked like normal babies, chubby-cheeked and innocent. But in the later images, there was something undeniably disturbing about them. It wasn't anything I could point to specifically. Their features were symmetrical, their smiles appropriate, but their eyes were empty, like looking into a deep well and seeing nothing reflected back. The last photograph showed them standing side by side in what looked like a hospital room, wearing matching white gowns. They were holding hands, their faces expressionless. Written on the back in my grandmother's handwriting, the last photograph, "May they find peace." Had my grandmother sent her own children away, institutionalized them for 8 years before some experimental treatment killed them? It seemed unthinkable, yet the evidence was right in front of me. I was about to close the trunk when I noticed something else at the bottom, a small, leather-bound book, different from the journals. It looked older, the cover worn smooth from handling. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't a book at all, but a collection of newspaper clippings, carefully preserved between tissue-thin pages. The clippings dated back to the early 1900s, each documenting a similar story. Twins born to the women in my family, followed by unexplained deaths, mysterious illnesses, or the twins themselves disappearing under suspicious circumstances. The pattern repeated generation after generation, always with twins, always with tragedy. The final clipping was from a local newspaper dated December 26, 1952, my grandfather's obituary. It mentioned his surviving wife and infant twins, but there was no mention of my mother, who would have been 5 years old at the time. I checked the other journals, looking for any mention of my mother, and found a single entry from 1950. "Margaret turns 3 today. She is such a joy, normal, healthy, everything a child should be. I thank God every day that she wasn't born a twin." Perhaps the curse has skipped a generation. A curse? What was my grandmother talking about? And if my mother was 5 when the twins were born, why hadn't she ever mentioned having siblings? I needed to talk to her. I gathered the journals and photographs, stuffing them into a canvas bag I found hanging on a nearby hook. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something in the far corner of the attic, something that didn't belong among the trunks and furniture. It was a door, small, barely 4 feet high, set into the sloped ceiling. It looked newer than the surrounding architecture, the wood less weathered, the hinges less rusted. There was no lock, just a simple latch keeping it closed. Common sense told me to leave it alone, to take what I'd found and get out of the attic. But I had come too far to stop now. I approached the door and lifted the latch. The space beyond was dark, the air noticeably colder. My flashlight revealed a small room with a sharply angled ceiling, empty except for 2 rocking chairs facing each other in the center. They were child-sized, painted white with faded pink cushions tied to the seats. As my light swept across the room, I noticed something else: markings on the walls, floor, and ceiling. They formed an intricate pattern that seemed to shift and move in the beam of my flashlight. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of the symbols. They weren't any language I recognized, but they gave me an uneasy feeling, as if they were words that human mouths weren't meant to speak. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around, my heart hammering in my chest. The door had swung shut, though there wasn't enough breeze in the attic to account for it. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge, as if held closed by an invisible force. Panic rose in my throat as I threw my shoulder against the door, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, it gave way suddenly, sending me sprawling onto the attic floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I reached the main staircase, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I found my mother in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. She looked up when I entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the canvas bag clutched in my white-knuckled grip. "You've been in the attic," she said. It wasn't a question. I dumped the contents of the bag onto the table, the journals, the medical records, the photographs. "Tell me about the twins," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Tell me what happened to Theodore and Theodora." My mother's face drained of color as she stared at the items spread before her. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then she took a deep breath and gestured for me to sit. "I was 5 when they were born," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember being excited to have a brother and sister, but from the beginning, there was something wrong with them. They didn't cry like normal babies. They just stared, watching everything, everyone. Mother became obsessed with them, convinced they were somehow evil." She picked up one of the photographs, her finger tracing the outline of the twins' faces. Father didn't believe her. He thought she was experiencing some kind of postpartum psychosis. He wanted to get her help, but she refused to leave the twins alone with anyone else. She was afraid of what they might do. "And then he died," I said softly. My mother nodded. "They said it was an accident, that he tripped and fell down the stairs in the middle of the night, but I was awake. I heard them laughing afterward, Theodore and Theodora laughing in their cribs. They were only 6 months old." A chill ran down my spine. "What happened next?" "Mother took them away after Christmas. She told everyone they had died of pneumonia, but she sent them to some private hospital in Europe. I didn't know where until years later when I found some of her correspondence. By then, they really were dead. Some experimental treatment went wrong, or so the hospital claimed. And the room on the 3rd floor, the nursery mother preserved it exactly as it was the day she took them away. She would go in there sometimes just to sit. She never allowed anyone else inside. I think she felt guilty. Despite everything, they were still her children. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd read the journals. Do you believe they were evil, actually evil? My mother was silent for a long moment, her fingers still tracing the photograph. I believe there are things in this world we can't explain, she said finally. Things beyond our understanding. The twins were something else, something not quite human. The journals mentioned a curse, I pressed. Something about twins in our family. My mother sighed deeply. It's an old family legend. Every few generations, twins are born to the women in our line, and those twins are never right. They bring death and destruction. The only way to end the cycle is to... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. To kill them, I supplied, my voice hollow. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Mother couldn't do it. She couldn't kill her own children, no matter what they were, so she sent them away instead. But the guilt ate at her for the rest of her life. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of this family secret pressing down on us like a physical thing. Finally, my mother reached across the table and took my hand. You need to leave this house, Eliza, she said urgently. Sell it, burn it down, I don't care, but don't stay here. The twins, their influence lingers. I felt it all my life, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Promise me you won't stay. I promised, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I wouldn't keep them. I had come too far, uncovered too much to walk away now. There was still something missing, some piece of the puzzle I hadn't found yet. That night, I dreamed of the twins. They stood at the foot of my bed, holding hands, their faces expressionless. Play with us, Eliza, they said in unison, their voices neither male nor female, child nor adult. Grandmother is waiting. I woke with a start, my nightgown soaked with sweat. The bedroom was dark, but I could have sworn I saw two small figures retreating through the door, hand in hand. The next morning, my mother left early, citing some urgent business back in the city. I think she couldn't bear to be in the house any longer, surrounded by memories and ghosts. I didn't try to stop her. In fact, I was relieved to have the house to myself, to continue my investigation without her concerned glances and whispered warnings. I spent the day combing through the remaining trunks in the attic, searching for any additional information about the twins or the supposed family curse. I found birth and death certificates for generations of twins dating back to the 1800s, all showing the same pattern. Twins born, tragedy following close behind, the twins themselves dying young or disappearing. But it was in a hidden compartment in my grandmother's desk that I found the most disturbing evidence, yet a small, leather-bound volume titled The Montgomery Family Grimoire. The book was handwritten in different styles, suggesting it had been passed down and added to over generations. Its pages contained rituals, spells, and incantations, many focusing on protection against malevolent spirits and entities. One passage in particular caught my attention. The twin curse has plagued the women of our line since Abigail Montgomery made her pact with the entity in 1723. Every third generation, twin children are born who serve as vessels for this entity's influence in our world. They appear human, but are not. They wear the faces of innocence but harbor ancient malice. The only true protection is to end their existence before they can fully manifest their powers, preferably before their first birthday. If this cannot be done, they must be bound using the ritual of containment, though this is a temporary measure at best. The entity cannot be destroyed, only delayed in its purpose. The book went on to describe the ritual of containment in detail, a complex ceremony involving symbols drawn in specific patterns, incantations spoken at precise intervals, and various herbs and minerals arranged in a protective circle. The goal was to bind the entity to a specific location, preventing it from spreading its influence beyond those boundaries. With a growing sense of dread, I realized that the symbols I had seen in the small room behind the attic door matched those described in the grimoire. My grandmother had performed the ritual, binding whatever malevolent force inhabited the twins to that tiny space. But according to the grimoire, such bindings were temporary, requiring renewal every 25 years. My grandmother had died just over a month ago. The binding would be weakening. As if to confirm my fears, I began to notice subtle changes in the house. Doors that I was certain I had closed would be open when I returned. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in unlikely places. At night, I would hear footsteps in the hallway, the creak of rocking chairs, childish whispers just beyond the threshold of hearing. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by lack of sleep and the disturbing information I had uncovered. But deep down, I knew better. Something was awakening in the old house, something that had been bound and contained for decades. I needed to perform the ritual again to strengthen the binding before whatever was trapped in that attic room broke free completely. But the grimoire warned that the ritual was dangerous for the uninitiated, potentially fatal if performed incorrectly. I needed help. My Aunt Catherine had always been the black sheep of the family, estranged from my grandmother for reasons no one ever explained. She lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by gardens filled with herbs and flowers that most people would consider weeds. Local children called her a witch, though never to her face. There were rumors that she practiced the old ways, whatever that meant. I had always been fond of Aunt Catherine, despite seeing her rarely. She had a warmth that my grandmother lacked, a genuine interest in my life and thoughts. If anyone would know about family curses and binding rituals, it would be her. I found her in her garden, kneeling among rows of plants I couldn't identify, her gray hair pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "I've been expecting you," she said, rising to her feet with a grace that belied her 70 years. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." Her cottage was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits, cozy and cluttered, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. Books lined every available surface, their spines cracked and faded from use. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling beams, and various crystals caught the light streaming through the windows. She led me to a small table by the window and gestured for me to sit. "You found the grimoire," she said without preamble, "and you've been in the binding room." I nodded, not bothering to ask how she knew. "The twins," I began. "Were never twins at all," she finished for me. "At least, not in the way you're thinking." She rose and went to a cabinet in the corner, returning with a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. From it, she removed a stack of yellowed photographs, placing them carefully on the table between us. "These are the twins from each generation," she explained, spreading the photos out like a macabre family tree. "Look closely." I leaned forward, studying the images. Each showed a pair of children, a boy and a girl, at various ages, different faces, different time periods, different clothing. But there was something eerily similar about all of them, something in the eyes, in the expressionless set of their mouths. "They look related," I said hesitantly. "They look identical," Catherine corrected. "Not to each other, but across generations. The Theodore from 1952 looks exactly like the Thomas from 1903. who looks exactly like the Timothy from 1854, and the same for the girls. Because they're not different children at all. They're the same entity, born again and again into our family, wearing slightly different faces but carrying the same essence. I shook my head, trying to process what she was saying. That's impossible. Is it? She tapped one of the photographs, my grandmother's twins at about 5 years old. Look at their eyes. Really look. I did as she asked and felt a chill run through me. There was something ancient in those childish eyes, something that had seen centuries come and go, something patient and calculating and utterly inhuman. What are they? I whispered. We don't know, not really, Catherine replied. The grimoire calls it an entity, but that's just a word for something we don't understand. It made a pact with Abigail Montgomery in 1723 power and prosperity for the family in exchange for allowing it to incarnate every third generation. Abigail agreed, not understanding what she was doing. By the time she realized her mistake, it was too late. And my grandmother, the ritual she performed? Elizabeth was always the strongest of us. When her twins began showing their true nature, she researched the old ways, found the binding ritual. She couldn't bring herself to kill them. They were the faces of her children, after all. So she bound the entity to that room in the attic, containing its influence. But the binding is weakening, Catherine said gravely. The ritual must be renewed every quarter century, or with the death of the one who performed it, whichever comes first. Elizabeth is gone. The binding is failing. Then we need to perform it again, I said, with more confidence than I felt. The grimoire has the instructions. It's not that simple, Eliza. The ritual requires blood from a direct descendant of the twins. Elizabeth used her own blood as their mother. But now, she paused, her eyes searching mine. I'm not a direct descendant, I realized. My mother is, but not me. Exactly, and Margaret would never participate. She spent her life running from this family legacy. That leaves only one option. Catherine met my gaze steadily. I am Elizabeth's younger sister. We share the same blood. I can perform the ritual, but I will need your help. It's dangerous, Eliza. If something goes wrong, what choice do we have? I interrupted. If we do nothing, whatever is in that room will break free completely. Catherine studied me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll need to prepare. The ritual must be performed at midnight when the veil between worlds is thinnest, and we'll need supplies. She rose and began pulling books from shelves, jars from cabinets. Take these, she said, handing me a list. Go to the old apothecary on Maple Street. Mr. Chun knows me. Tell him I sent you. I spent the afternoon gathering the necessary items, rare herbs, specific minerals, candles made from beeswax and animal fat. Mr. Chun asked no questions as he packaged everything carefully, though his eyes held a knowing sadness when I mentioned my aunt's name. By the time I returned to my grandmother's house, my house now, I reminded myself, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house seemed to loom larger in the fading light, its windows like watchful eyes tracking my approach. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. As I moved through the foyer, I could have sworn I heard childish laughter echoing from somewhere deep within the house. Aunt Catherine arrived just after sunset, carrying a large leather satchel and wearing an expression of grim determination. They know what we're planning, she said without preamble. They'll try to stop us. We worked quickly, preparing the items for the ritual according to the grimoire's instructions. Catherine mixed herbs in specific proportions, grinding them with a mortar and pestle while chanting softly under her breath. I arranged candles in the pattern described in the book, a 5-pointed star within a circle, with specific minerals placed at each point. As midnight approached, we made our way to the attic, carrying our supplies in solemn procession. The house seemed to resist our progress, doors suddenly difficult to open, floorboards creaking protestingly beneath our feet. The temperature dropped noticeably as we ascended the narrow staircase to the 3rd floor, our breath visible in the chilled air. The nursery door stood open when we reached it, though I was certain I had closed and locked it after my initial exploration. Inside, the room appeared undisturbed, the crib standing silent vigil in the moonlight. But something felt different, a presence, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Don't look at the photograph," Catherine warned as we passed through. "Don't look at anything too closely. Keep your mind focused on what we're doing." The attic stairs felt steeper than I remembered, the darkness at the top more absolute. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening despite fresh batteries. Catherine produced a lantern from her satchel, an old-fashioned thing of brass and glass, the flame inside burning with an unnaturally steady light. "Oil blessed by a priest in 1842, she explained, seeing my questioning look. "Some things can't be corrupted." The door to the binding room was open, swung wide as if an invitation. Beyond it, the 2 child-sized rocking chairs were moving gently back and forth, though there was no breeze in the attic to account for the motion. They stopped abruptly as we entered, the sudden stillness more unnerving than the movement had been. "Work quickly," Catherine instructed, setting the lantern on the floor. "Draw the circle exactly as shown in the grimoire. I'll prepare the incantation." I began sketching the complex pattern on the wooden floor, using chalk made from crushed bone and ash. The symbols felt wrong somehow, as if they belonged to no human language, angles that hurt the eye to follow, curves that seemed to bend in impossible directions. As I drew, I could feel resistance, as if the floor itself were fighting against the markings. Catherine stood in the center of the room, reciting words from the grimoire in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice rose and fell in strange cadences, sometimes dropping to a whisper, sometimes rising to a near shout. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost forming on the walls and ceiling despite the summer heat outside. As I completed the circle, connecting the last line to the first, a shock ran through my body like an electrical current. The symbols began to glow with a pale blue light, illuminating the room more brightly than the lantern. "The candles," Catherine ordered, her voice strained. "Place them at the points of the star, quickly." I scrambled to obey, positioning the black candles at each intersection of the star pattern within the circle. As I placed the last one, Catherine began the final phase of the ritual, drawing a small silver knife across her palm. Blood welled from the cut, dripping onto the grimoire she held open before her. "With blood of the line I bind thee," she intoned. "With words of power I contain thee. By salt and iron, by silver and ash, I command thee to remain within these bounds until the appointed time." The symbols flared brighter, the blue light shifting to a deep, pulsing red. The rocking chairs began to move again, faster and faster, the wood creaking in protest at the unnatural motion. The temperature dropped further, ice crystals forming in the air around us, and then came the voices, childish yet ancient, speaking in unison from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot bind us forever, daughter of Montgomery," they said. "We are eternal, we are patient. We will have what was promised to us." Catherine faltered, her face pale in the eerie light. I moved to her side, supporting her as she swayed on her feet. "Continue the ritual," I urged. "We have to finish it." She nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "Final words to seal the binding," she murmured, turning to the last page of the grimoire. Her eyes widened in shock. "It's gone. The final incantation, it's been erased." I looked over her shoulder and saw that she was right. Where there should have been text, there was only a blank space, as if the words had been lifted cleanly from the page. "How is that possible?" I whispered. "The book was locked in my grandmother's desk." "They've been planning this," Catherine realized, horror dawning on her face. "All these years, they've been waiting, influencing events from within their prison. They knew Elizabeth would die, knew the binding would weaken. They've prepared." The voices came again, louder now, accompanied by the sound of childish laughter that raised goosebumps on my skin. "Did you think we were helpless? Did you think we were contained? Foolish women, playing with forces you cannot comprehend. The pact cannot be broken. The promise must be fulfilled." The symbols on the floor began to fade, the glowing light dimming as the binding weakened further. The rocking chairs stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, I heard a new sound, small footsteps approaching the door of the binding room. "We need the final words," I said desperately. "Catherine, think my grandmother must have told you something, left some clue." Catherine closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elizabeth knew this might happen. She would have prepared a contingency. Her eyes snapped open. "The music box. In the nursery, the one that plays that eerie lullaby. Elizabeth always kept it wound, always made sure it worked. I thought it was just sentimentality, but I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, ducking through the small door and racing across the attic. Behind me, I heard Catherine continuing the ritual, her voice raised in defiance against the childish taunts that filled the air. The nursery was different when I entered it this time, the air thick with malevolence, the shadows deeper and more substantial. The cribs seemed to loom larger, the toys arranged on the shelves watching me with invisible eyes. On the dresser between the cribs sat a delicate porcelain music box, painted with scenes of children playing in a garden. I approached cautiously, half expecting it to shatter or disappear before I could reach it. But it remained solid and real under my trembling fingers as I lifted the lid. A tinkling melody began to play, a lullaby I recognized from my own childhood, the notes slightly discordant, slightly wrong. Inside the box, nestled on a cushion of faded velvet, was a small piece of paper folded into a tight square. I unfolded it carefully, revealing a single sentence written in my grandmother's precise hand. "To end what began, return them to where they first came." I stared at the words, trying to decipher their meaning. Return them? Return who? The twins? But they were dead, had been for decades, and where had they first come from? A child's voice spoke directly behind me, so close I could feel breath on my neck. She could never do it. She was too weak. "But you're not weak, are you, Eliza?" I whirled around, but the nursery was empty. The voice came again from the direction of the cribs. "We've been waiting for you. We knew you would come back to this house eventually. Blood calls to blood." In the crib on the left, a small shape was forming, solidifying out of the shadows, the outline of a child, a boy of about 8 with dark hair and darker eyes. In the second crib, a similar shape appeared, a girl, identical to the boy in every way except for her longer hair. "Theodore," I whispered, "Theodora." They smiled in unison, the expression never reaching their eyes. "We've had many names," they said together, "many faces, but always the same purpose. What purpose? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. To collect what is owed, they replied. A soul from each generation, payment for the pact Abigail made. Prosperity and power in exchange for us. I backed away, clutching the paper from the music box. My grandmother bound you, I said. She found a way to contain you. Their laughter was like broken glass. Temporarily, but bindings weaken. People die, and we are very, very patient. From somewhere above, I heard Catherine cry out in pain. The ritual was failing. Whatever contingency my grandmother had planned, I needed to figure it out now. I looked down at the paper again. To end what began, return them to where they first came. Where had it all begun? The pact Abigail Montgomery had made in 1723. The cemetery, I realized aloud. The family mausoleum. Abigail is buried there. The twins' smiles faltered, their forms flickering like candles in a breeze. You know nothing, they hissed. But I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. I turned and ran, the paper clutched in my hand, the twins' angry cries following me down the stairs. Outside, the night was unnaturally still, the moon hidden behind clouds that had appeared from nowhere. I ran across the overgrown lawn toward the small family cemetery at the edge of the property, my heart hammering in my chest. The Montgomery Mausoleum stood at the center of the cemetery, a small neoclassical structure of weathered marble. The door was locked, but the key my grandmother had left me, the one that had opened the nursery, fit this lock as well. Inside, stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each engraved with names and dates spanning centuries. At the far end, set apart from the others, was a plain stone altar. I approached it cautiously, running my fingers over the smooth surface. There were no engravings, no decorations, nothing to indicate its purpose or significance. But as my hand passed over the center, I felt a slight depression, a space that seemed designed for something to fit inside. Behind me, the temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming on the stone walls. I turned to see the twins standing in the doorway, their forms more substantial now, more real. It won't work, they said, their voices echoing in the confined space. You don't have what's needed. You don't have the grimoire. The grimoire, the family book of spells and rituals. It was still in the attic with Catherine. Without it, I had no idea what ritual to perform, what words to say to end this. But as I looked at the twins, at their identical expressions of smug certainty, a realization struck me. The final ritual wasn't in the grimoire at all. My grandmother had removed it, hidden it separately in the music box, because the grimoire itself was part of the problem, part of the pact Abigail had made. I don't need the grimoire, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I just need to unmake what Abigail did. I placed my hand on the altar and spoke the words that came to my mind, words I somehow knew were right. I, Eliza Montgomery, descendant of Abigail, do hereby renounce the pact made in 1723. I return what was taken and reclaim what was given. The debt is paid. The cycle is broken. The twins screamed, a sound of rage and fear that shook the very foundations of the mausoleum. Their forms began to dissolve, edges blurring, features melting into indistinct shadows. You can't, they shrieked. The price will be too high. I'm willing to pay it, I said, though I had no idea what the price might be. This ends tonight. A wind rose from nowhere, swirling around the mausoleum, extinguishing the single candle I had lit upon entering. In the sudden darkness, I felt rather than saw the twins' presence weaken. their centuries-old grip on my family finally loosening. There was a moment of absolute silence, a heartbeat of perfect stillness. Then a blinding light filled the mausoleum, so bright I had to shield my eyes. When it faded, the twins were gone. In their place stood a woman in clothing from another century, her face bearing a strong resemblance to my own. "Abigail," I whispered. She nodded, a sad smile on her lips. "You've done what I could not," she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You've ended it. The debt is paid." "What was the price?" I asked. "They said there would be a price." "The prosperity," she replied simply. "The wealth, the success, the privilege that our family has enjoyed for generations, it's gone now. You'll be ordinary, Eliza. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. No special talents, no extraordinary luck, no inexplicable successes." I thought about what she was saying. The Montgomery family fortune, built over centuries, now gone. The advantages I had taken for granted all my life vanished. But then I thought of the twins, of the malevolence that had haunted my family for generations, of the lives destroyed and the souls corrupted. "It's worth it," I said firmly. Abigail smiled, a genuine smile this time, reaching her eyes. "I thought you would say that. You're stronger than I was. Stronger than any of us." She began to fade, her form becoming transparent. "The house will go too," she warned. It was part of the bargain. Get what you need and leave before dawn. With those words, she vanished completely, leaving me alone in the dark mausoleum. I made my way back to the house, finding Catherine in the kitchen, nursing the cup of tea with trembling hands. She looked up when I entered, relief washing over her face. "They're gone," she said. It wasn't a question. I felt it, like a weight lifting, a shadow passing. "What did you do?" I explained what had happened in the mausoleum, the words I had spoken, the appearance of Abigail. Catherine listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. "So it's over," she said when I had finished. "Truly over after all these generations." "But at a cost," I reminded her. "The family fortune, the house, everything." She laughed, a sound of genuine joy that seemed to brighten the kitchen. "A small price to pay for freedom, don't you think? Besides, there are worse things than being ordinary." She rose from her chair, suddenly energetic. "We should pack what we can." If Abigail said the house will go, I believe her. We spent the rest of the night gathering what we could: family photographs, personal mementos, items of sentimental rather than monetary value. The journals and records about the twins we burned in the fireplace, watching as centuries of darkness turned to ash. As dawn approached, we loaded Catherine's car and took one last look at the house. In the early morning light, it already seemed diminished somehow, less imposing, less grand. Just an old house slowly crumbling back into the earth. We drove away as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the winding dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I watched as the house seemed to waver, like a mirage in the desert heat. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone, replaced by an empty clearing, as if the Montgomery mansion had never existed at all. "Where will you go?" Catherine asked as we reached the main road. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My life in the city seemed like a dream now, belonging to someone else entirely. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts." She smiled, her eyes on the road ahead. "That sounds perfect." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the miles stretching behind us, carrying us away from a legacy of darkness and toward something new, something ordinary and therefore precious. I don't know what the future holds for me now. Without the Montgomery fortune, I'll need to make my own way in the world, relying on my own talents and efforts rather than an inherited advantage. The thought is both terrifying and exhilarating. But one thing I know for certain, I will never again have to face what my grandmother faced, what generations of Montgomery women faced before her. I will never have to look into the eyes of my own children and see something ancient and malevolent looking back. I will never have to whisper, "We don't speak of the twins. The curse is broken. The cycle is ended." And that, I think, is worth any price. Thank you for joining me for tonight's tale. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share with those who appreciate the darker side of life. Until next time, sleep well if you can.